Coming up on Network Africa, Sudan government boycotts regional peace talks in Ethiopia. Human Rights Watch urges the International Criminal Court to investigate war crimes in Darfur. And hunger haunts Ethiopia's Tigray region after years of war. Hello and welcome to Network Africa. I'm Joke Rogers right here in Lagos. We start off in Ethiopia, where Sudan's government refused to participate in a meeting put together to discuss the implementation of a roadmap for peace in the war-torn region. Officials from the IGAD Quartet group of countries, which consists of Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan, had met in Addis Ababa, and the meeting, chaired by Kenya's president, included regional AU Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, and the international guests such as representative of the UN Humanitarian Agency, the EU, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the USA, and the UK. Sudan's foreign ministry had asked for Kenyan President William Ruto to be replaced, in particular because of what it perceived as his partiality, but the RSF sent a representative to the quartet meeting as well. After almost 3 months of conflict, the fighting between Sudan's two generals has been concentrated mainly in Darfur, the capital, Khartoum, in the Blue Nile state near Ethiopia, and in South Kordofan state. No political solution has emerged despite initiatives and ceasefires that weren't systematically respected. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development in Eastern Africa said it would concentrate the efforts of all stakeholders towards delivering a face-to-face meeting between the leaders of the warring parties, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohamed Daglo. And following Sudan's boycott of talks, senior officials from East African countries have suggested a military deployment to Sudan, where the almost 3-month war is escalating. Meeting in Ethiopia, the regional body IGAD said sending in an East African standby force could help protect civilians and guarantee humanitarian access. Given how intense the fighting is right now and the general lawlessness, it seems doubtful that any troops will be sent in soon. An international presence is also likely to be opposed by the two sides fighting the war. An IGAD statement says it's regrettable that the army delegation chose not to attend. The United Nations says there's no way to send humanitarian aid anyhow to Darfur, even as access remains virtually nil and the security situation extraordinarily dangerous. The recent conflicts between the two warring sides in Sudan mainly took place in Omdurman, near the capital. Important military targets such as air bases, engineering corps headquarters, and Central Reserve Force headquarters of the Sudanese army are in the city. The city is also an important supply base for the RSF to transfer troops and weapons from Darfur in the western Sudan to the peripheral areas of the capital.
Access to Darfur remains virtually nil. Getting in from Chadian authorities being extremely helpful and cooperative to get us into West Darfur. They're great, but the security situation in West Darfur still is extraordinarily dangerous. And getting aid from Port Sudan, across Sudan, through El Obeid and into Darfur from the east is made all the more difficult by the fact that the battle zone, of course, has also moved south, hasn't it, towards the Kordofans and the SPLM.
In the meantime, the medical system in Sudan's greater capital area is said to be on the brink of collapse, as only 20% of medical institutions remain barely operational. The data released by the International Committee on the Red Cross show that 18 hospitals were hit by bombings, while 21 others were occupied by armed forces across the greater capital area, comprising Khartoum, Omdurman, and Khartoum North. According to officials working for Al-Nal Hospital, the last and only functioning one in Omdurman, home to over 1 million population, they mainly rely on their own generators, as the city only offers a few hours of power and water supply each day. Another challenge faced by the hospital is said to be insufficient medical staff, as many of them are stuck at home due to the disrupted public transportation, while some others have fled the conflict-hit area together with ordinary citizens. Moreover, the hospital has also been struggling with a lack of medical supplies and humanitarian assistance, as deliveries are frequently disrupted by the ongoing violence. And the campaign group Human Rights Watch has called on the International Criminal Court to investigate war crimes committed in the western Sudanese region of Darfur, including the killings of dozens of civilians. The incidents purportedly happened during an ethnically motivated attack on a town where homes were looted and then set ablaze. The rights group accuses Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces and allied Arab militias of carrying out the attack in late May, which officials say left 97 people dead. Let's bring in journalist VOA Africa Center, Nairobi, Kenya, Mariama Diallo for more perspective on the events surrounding the war in Sudan. Hello, Mariama.
Hello there. Thanks for having me again today.
Right, so Sudan had already raised an objection to Kenya chairing the meeting. Why do you think a quarter of the countries did not heed the call?
Well, I think the quartet doesn't really have the power to decide on that. I think President Ruto's leading the group was decided by the IGAD bloc, and the IGAD bloc is a group that is composed of 8 countries. And on the other hand, also the Sudanese army had RSVP'd yes, that they were going to attend, and then thinking probably maybe something will change. But obviously the Sudanese Army General Al-Burhan from the beginning has been insisting that he does not want Kenyan leader, the Kenyan president, to lead the group in these negotiations. But I guess maybe they thought once they RSVP'd, maybe their demands will be met, and at the end it wasn't, and they decided not to show up.
Can you give us an example or two of what Kenya did to evoke this strong response from the Sudanese government?
I think as far as we know, the Kenyan leader has been accused by General Al-Burhan for basically having, being friendlier to the enemy, being friendlier to Dagalo, a.k.a. Hemeti. That's what we have so far. But, he has to know, either him or his representatives and his allies, that President Ruto is not mediating this crisis by himself. He's coming in with other African countries, including countries like Somalia, countries like South Sudan, Ethiopia, and all those countries actually have something to say. They've had conflicts in their own countries, and maybe they can bring their experience and, and maybe learn, teach something, like something can come out of whatever happened in their countries to help mediate this crisis. Even Kenya has also dealt with its own conflicts. But on the other hand, Kenya has also been, crucial and in kind of mediating and participating in peacekeeping in the East African region, in Somalia, in South Sudan, and also in the Great Lakes region. Maybe his experience, the country's experience, can help get out of this conflict.
And Ruto's presence being rejected is one thing. So why might international presence as well in Darfur be frowned on by both Sudanese armies?
Well, I think the international intervention is nobody wants international intervention. This is why peacekeeping forces take a long time to agree on going into somebody else's territory. I think also the problem with the Sudanese issue, I'm sure the two generals, the last thing they want to see is someone else being in there, looking at their actions and basically holding them accountable finally, because so far they've been able to do whatever they want. So that international intervention is definitely it's a fear, I'm sure, and also it could create other issues. This is what other people are saying, that a military issue cannot be solved by another military intervention, because it could bring other players in that war and basically take it to another level. But at this point, I think 3 months into the war, there has to be a plan B. Since the generals don't seem to agree or to listen or to just mediate, to just have a dialogue. I think the plan B, that's what most analysts are saying, and that's what probably IGAD bloc is seeing at this point, is to throw that in. Maybe, maybe it will happen, maybe it won't happen, maybe it will take a while to happen, but maybe the general knowing that that possibility is also on the table might make a difference at this point.
And part of the propositions, I believe, is that, troops might be sent in to actually help to stem some of this fighting, especially with the protection of civilians. There are also predictions that whatever troops to be sent in can't even be deployed yet because of the intensity of the fighting. Yet it's so difficult to send humanitarian aid, and medical systems are just about collapsing. Mariama, what will break this stalemate?
Well, I think that's the thing. I mean, when you think about it, when you have two lions who are fighting and you come into that fight and try to broker truce, I mean, that's risky. You might get killed before even you kind of shoot you have the first shot. So it is hard. It is dangerous. It's I mean, even the countries who are going to decide they want to send troops, it's risky. To try to kind of mediate, to try to find a way to just stop the fighting. But yeah, I mean, it's a very legitimate point that the fighting is so intense. How do you come and stop it? But if there's no other ways to do it, I think they have to try. And I think, as I just said, I'm sure that the fear is to get other players into this war and widen it. Who knows where is it gonna take the war? But at this point, I mean, if diplomacy didn't work, I mean, I think this week there is, the IGAD, after the IGAD meeting, I think Egypt is also trying to have another meeting with neighboring countries, and maybe what I think is that Egypt is going to try to maybe use what leverage the other countries could have, whether it's with Dagalo or with Al-Burhan, and try to also find that, figure out that side and see if that could help. But it is a complicated situation, a lot of mediation, lots of diplomacy, lots of meetings, but it's 3 months into the war, and something has to be done for the Sudanese people.
Right, indeed. Thank you, Mariama, for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's move on. A major oil project in East Africa will have dire consequences for the environment and local communities. That's according to Human Rights Watch. The French oil company Total and Chinese state-owned oil firms signed a $10 billion deal last year to develop Uganda's oil fields and build a 1,400-kilometer pipeline to the Tanzanian port of Tanga. The New York-based rights group says the project will harm fragile ecosystems, and some of the tens of thousands of people being displaced have been poorly treated. The European Parliament has also denounced the project for similar reasons. Total has denied the allegations. Despite the criticism, President Yoweri Museveni has vowed to go ahead with the project. And still ahead on the program. Court in Libya sentences 37 smugglers for causing the death of 11 migrants. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The All Truck Drivers Forum and Allied South Africans has called for the swift action against the perpetrators behind the recent wave of attacks targeting truck drivers in the country. This follows a disturbing incident that occurred in the early hours of Sunday on the N3 highway where 6 trucks were engulfed in flames. According to the police, a group of men stopped the trucks near Van Reenen's Pass, forced them out of their vehicles before setting the trucks on fire and then fled the scene. Overnight, 2 more trucks have been set alight by the arsonists, but National Police Commissioner in South Africa, Fanny Masemola, has announced that police roadblocks will be set up along major transport routes countrywide to prevent any more truck attacks.
We are hoping that the police can find the culprits that are doing this, but we are also hoping that the relevant departments should do what is correct, because it's not the South African drivers that said truck driving is not a skill. It's a skill that is supposed to be reserved for South Africans. Let them do the enforcement on that. Let's get all these foreign drivers out. Let's have South African drivers in, because there is even a fine that is prescribed there, that should an employer be found to have employed a foreign person without following the proper procedure, there is a fine. But here in South Africa, we've never heard of such employers being arrested and those fines issued to them. So we're hoping that the relevant departments would do the correct thing so that our South African brothers can get employment.
Right, and it's not the right thing, because you don't want uncertainty, especially when it comes to policy. And whether you are talking Western investors or you are talking the other investors, all of them will require policy certainty. So as a country, I think what's important for us is to maintain that policy certainty, and then people will be able to work around it, because investors, just like markets, they just want some form of policy certainty, and then from there, they will take it and see how they deal with it, whether it's good or bad news, but there need to be some certainty. So yes, that is not a good thing, and it's not just only a bad thing for the Western or the Russian allies, but it's just not good for us as a country. We have to make sure that we don't have those kind of things.
And one of the critical instruments to manage perceptions of investors globally is to communicate, to firstly have a position, and then communicate that position consistently. So what you don't want is for the business fraternity to say one thing when the president and his leadership says quite another. So there has to be an alignment in terms of what South Africa stands for when it comes to the relationship between itself and Russia, but importantly, reassuring investors. And we've seen some international interests from recently. Germany was in South Africa, and a few other European countries.
Meanwhile, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has offered his sincere congratulations to his Sierra Leonean counterpart, Julius Bio, on his re-election as president. According to the spokesperson to the president, Vincent Magwenya, the South African president commended the people of Sierra Leone for conducting peaceful and successful elections. He adds that both presidents look forward to further engagements and working together within the context of bilateral cooperation, key regional, continental, and global issues. Mr. Ramaphosa assured President Bio of his commitment to continue enhancing and strengthening bilateral cooperation between South Africa and Sierra Leone. In Ethiopia's Tigray region, hunger and drought persists after years of war, a conflict that has driven people from their homes, destroyed harvests, and disrupted food aid. The aid flows to Tigray had resumed after the November ceasefire, but were temporarily halted earlier this year. The WFP and U.S. Agency for International Development, both major donors, said they had paused flows because some aid was being diverted from those in need. And following deaths of 11 migrants who drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, a Libyan court has jailed 37 people convicted of human trafficking. 5 members of the criminal gang were sentenced to life in prison, while others received between 1 and 15 years. All had been involved in organizing a dilapidated boat that was supposed to take the migrants to Italy. Rights groups say many migrants experience horrific treatment there, both at the hands of smuggling gangs and inside state-run detention centers. Let's take you back to the situation in Kenya's Tigray region, where hunger and drought has continued to persist despite efforts by humanitarian aid donors to alleviate hunger from people. The aid flows to Tigray had resumed after the November ceasefire, but were temporarily halted earlier this year.
Curled up on a hospital bed in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region, an emaciated little girl struggles to breathe as her father softly strokes her gaunt face and her mother sits crying. Sige Shishe, whose pink sweater reads "Beautiful" on the front, is 10 years old but weighs just 10 kilograms. Her doctor says she's dying, a new victim of an acute food shortage and an infection in a region blighted by 2 years of war and struggling with drought.
She's also getting treated for hospital-acquired infections. The issue with these infections is that we do not have the medicines to treat them. The medicines are very expensive because they are third generation. It can cost the family from 600 to 800 birr. That is approximately $11 to $15. And they do not have the capacity to purchase the medicines. Neither could we provide it. So, we are observing her while she is going, which is very painful.
Although aid flows resumed after the November ceasefire, they had to be paused, a move Ethiopia's government criticized, adding that it was investigating the diversion claims.
WFP is deeply concerned about the impact any pause in assistance may have on the lives of the families it assists. This is why we're urgently putting every practical safeguard in place to ensure food assistance reaches and is used by the intended beneficiaries.
The WFP and USAID say they were working to ensure aid reached the intended recipients and aim to restart flows as soon as possible. The WFP said it hoped to resume in July.
WFP is making significant strides towards restarting food distributions in Ethiopia as it continues to roll out essential reforms to the way humanitarian food assistance is delivered in the country. We are currently on track to resume food distributions in July, starting in the Tigray region. We are also implementing a new targeting methodology to identify the most vulnerable in the communities and rolling out a new digital registration system so that WFP can better identify and verify beneficiaries to ensure that the right people are receiving critical food at the right time.
The World Food Programme says about a fifth of the 6 million people in Tigray were severely food insecure in February, in a nation where 20 million people out of a total of 120 million population rely on assistance.
The Iranian president has begun a rare tour of Africa in an effort to reduce the Islamic Republic's isolation by forging new alliances. The 3-day trip to Africa is the first by an Iranian leader in 11 years. He's to visit Kenya, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. He welcomed Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf over the weekend in a bid to boost relations with Algiers. Meanwhile, the president of Mauritania, Mohamed Ghazouani, is calling Mali's return to the G5 Sahel organization. Mali left the regional military alliance fighting jihadist groups in May last year, citing loss of autonomy and instrumentalization within the organization. Mr. Ghazouani made the appeal in the Mauritanian capital at the opening of the 4th session of the General Assembly of the Sahel Alliance, a platform of 27 bilateral partners and donors set up to mobilize international aid for the development of the region. The junta that has ruled Mali since 2020 has broken with France and its allies, turning to Russia instead for help. And finally, Pope Francis has announced that he will elevate 21 churchmen to the high rank of cardinal, again putting his mark on the group that will one day choose his successor after his death or resignation. The 86-year-old Francis announced during his noon prayer to pilgrims and tourists in St. Peter's Square that the ceremony to install them, known as a consistory, will be held on September 30. 18 of the churchmen are under 80 and thus will be able to enter an eventual conclave to choose the next pope. The other 3 are over 80 and were named to thank them for the long service to the church. The new cardinals come from countries including the United States, Italy, Argentina, South Africa, Spain, Colombia, Poland, South Sudan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Tanzania, and Portugal.
Somos sacerdote misericordioso e fedele, mi aiutino nel mio ministerio di vescovo di Roma per il bene di tutto il santo popolo fedele di Dio.
That's our package today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.